Hello and welcome to Forever Boks, and we are almost exactly a month away from the start of the Springbok season with kickoff down in Cape Town against the Barbarians on the 28th of June, starting what is going to be one of the longest Springbok seasons we've had in well over a decade. In fact, it's about 15 or 16 years since we've had as many games in a single calendar year, which is really, really exciting. And the main thing about that is the squad rotation we're going to see and the difference of the players who are going to be phased in as well as potentially phased out during sort of the next 6 months of the rugby calendar. And I think the Barbarians game in particular offers a very unique opportunity to try new things, try new players without sort of cheaply giving out caps, which is what some people have said has happened in the past. And for the Rassie Erasmus, given the fact that he is very much looking to rotate and to try and give new players opportunity to try and build squad depth. Lots of people saying that some players are getting opportunities to become Springboks, where traditionally they wouldn't. And does that cheapen the jersey? Now, I think majority of us will agree it doesn't cheapen the jersey in terms of these players still have to earn that first Springbok cap, and if players can't take up the next level, they can't. However, at the end of the day, it's all for the greater good, and that becoming world champions. That is winning World Cups, and we're doing it at the moment. I don't think anyone is going to accuse Rassie Erasmus, for example, of being someone who wants to cheapen the jersey. But there are certain games starting to creep up in the last few years, which make it very easy to give players opportunities without having to sacrifice potentially results. You think about the Portugal game last year, where I think about 5 or 6 players made their debuts. We've now got a Barbarians game, a Georgian game this year, as well as 3 Italian games, which can also be a bit of rotation. But the Barbarians game officially being a non-cap game, for example, is the perfect opportunity to do 2 things. First of all, to bring players in and give them potential Springbok debuts, but unofficial debuts really, because they don't count as a test cap. You don't get to wear your blazer, for example, after you play against the Barbarians. Something like a Rowan Jansen van Rensburg has played for the Springboks, but not in a test match, and therefore is not considered a Springbok. But also, I think it gives an opportunity to bring in players who you haven't seen in a while, for example, in a game, which doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything towards world ranking points, is what I'm getting at. In a year where world ranking points are incredibly important, because the draw for the Rugby World Cup 2027 will take place in December based on the sort of points, world ranking points of the year and the world rankings and where we sort of rank. So it's basically a free hit, isn't it? And I don't think that means we're necessarily going to go with a completely sort of young, uncapped sort of 23. So basically what I've done is I've got a predicted or possible Springbok a team to sort of face against the Barbarians. And I've just done a 50-man team. The bench could obviously, we'll talk a little bit about players who could be on the bench. But what I've basically gone with is a combination of sort of young players getting opportunities, as well as players coming from Japan, for example, and testing out some combos, as well as players who've not been in the Springbok mix, for example, as well, in the last couple of years due to injuries and the likes, being able to be integrated back and sort of seeing how they fare. So it's a purely theoretical side, and I'll be interested to see what sort of people have to say about it. We don't even know a final squad, to be honest, so, we could also be you're talking absolute nonsense. So I'm not quite sure what happened there with regards to what this might look at. But this is basically what I've gone with. And as I say that, I'm not sure where it's all gone. Give me 2 seconds. Now I know what happened. And we're going to have a look at it in 3, 2, 1. Come on. Work with me, people. There it is. Right, so let's go through it, shall we? So in the front row, I've gone with an interesting combo of young Vessels, who I think that they rate really highly. I think they want to try and really make him a genuine option at 1/2. I've gone with Malcolm Mark starting because I think, I'd love to see what this combination of a front row looks like. Wilco Louw, for me, should be our starting loose tight head going into for the rest of the year. I think he's becoming our starting tight head. And I'd like to get an opportunity. I'd like to see Thomas du Toit coming off the bench. What I think that particular front row gives you, Malcolm Moss obviously solves, for example, a fetching option, and and I'd love to see what he sort of like starting. You could go with anybody at hooker, to be perfectly honest. You could go in 100 Vessels at hooker, but what I like about this is that you can have Thomas du Toit on the bench, for example. Now he covers 1 and 3. Jan Vessels covers 1 and 2. So you could really experiment with the bench. You could have, you could actually have 3 props on the bench, to be honest, if you wanted to, and you shift Jan Vessels to hooker later on in the game. And you could replace a Lucid and replace that same person if you want to. But it gives you options at the end of the day. I think Thomas du Toit would be on the bench for me in this scenario. Either covering 1 or 3. You could have a Gerard Stenekamp, for example. In the locks, I think we need to start building our lock depth. I do think Hassan Murat, for example, will likely play in this game. But I'd love to see what Cobus Wiese does. I think he's been playing really good rugby. We need to lengthen those lock stocks. And I think a combination of Cobus Wiese versus Lua Diaga, for example, brings Cobus Wiese into the Bok fold. And it brings back Lua Diaga, who's been out for a few years, but now is back and playing rugby again in Japan and staying fit and getting some games in. And it gives us an opportunity to have a look and see exactly where he is. Because, on his day, he still makes our best 23. And then the back 3 for me is a fun one. Cameron Hanekom, Vince Tuka, Juarno Augustus. Now, Cameron Hanekom, I do think, has a future at 6, which I think is very much needed, given the fact that I think, Mark Verstappen, for me, hasn't really always taken his opportunities. And I think that there's been a lot of talk about the succession plan for Siya Kolisi in the number 6 jersey. When he moves on, as well as Kwaka Smith, for example, can also play there. Vincent Tuka, I think, has been on the Bok radar for a while and hasn't been able to be part of Bok squads because of the eligibility issues and passports and IDs and the likes of that. He's in the alignment camp, so I think I'd love to see him get an opportunity, because I think that where Ben Jason Dixon didn't take his chance last year, I think if given the chance, Finch can do that. He's also very versatile, can play at lock as well. And then I've got Juarno Augustus at 8. I'd really like to see him have a go, to be honest. I think that he's played such good rugby over this past season. I think he would have been a Bok sooner had he stayed in South Africa. So this would be an opportunity to blood him. In terms of a halfback pairing, I've gone with Morne Feinberg and Sacha Feinberg-Mngomezulu, 2 very highly rated players that I think they're going to want to try and give any opportunity to give these 2 guys an opportunity. Morne Feinberg very much eyed as the long-term Faf de Klerk succession plan. And I think, given that Jaden Hendricks has not played particularly well this season, I do think that Morne Feinberg's got an opportunity, alongside Grant Williams, to establish himself in, as the 1-2. Then you've got to look at Cobus Reinach and Faf de Klerk in terms of their age and whether they're still around. But I think it's a nice opportunity to give Morne Feinberg a run with Sacha, who I think will be our number 110 moving forward. Edel van der Merwe, for me, has to come back into the mix after being so good in that debut and then injured. And I think this is a nice opportunity to give him game time. I'd love to see Ethan Hooker given a chance. And I think Ethan Hooker, for example, is such a talented player. At this stage, outside settings are going to be Lakanya and JC Creel. I'd love to see Ethan Hooker playing next to a JC Creel and sort of seeing how those 2 can operate as a combo. I think that we'll start to sort of see combos. And look, you can have Andre Esterhuizen probably coming off the bench, but I think Ethan Hooker would look at the other sort of argument, for example, is having Lakanya outside him as somebody who's familiar. But I do think that, especially JC Creel coming from Japan, they'll want to give him a bit of game time moving into that Boks thing as well. Then could you answer at 14? You could have had a Ches and Colby, for example. You got options there. You can have Maxima Pimpy in there at 11, Edel van der Merwe at 14. I do think those 2 players are kind of more younger sort of wings right now. Canan Moodie obviously could come into the mix as well. And Dame Willemse has to play, especially coming off the back of the ban that he's currently serving. He should, in theory, hopefully be back for this game if the Stormers can progress this weekend. If not, he might not be available for this game. But the main thing is, you want to see him back on a Boks jersey, give him an opportunity to get back into the mix going into the incoming series. I think come, the Rugby Championship, I'd like to see him back as our number 1 fullback. But he needs to obviously earn that jersey back. And we need to have opportunities to give him those chances alongside Napoli Fassi, alongside Kwaan Horn, alongside Willie Leroux as well. So that's the team I've gone with. What changes would you make? What would your bench look like? People I'd like to see on the bench, like an Andre Esterhuizen, for example, being around there. Thomas du Toit, as mentioned. I think Grant Williams will be around on that bench there. I think you could see a Jordan Hendrickson, for example, in and around that bench. You could see somebody like a Fassi, I think, will probably likely be on the bench. Who else could be potentially a part of that bench? You could have players like Ruan Okia on the bench. You could maybe see players like a Morne van der Merwe. I think he could be a very good option in this game as well. But I think also you've got to try and weigh up a good side and experienced players in key positions and around players who are still coming through. So, for example, in the pack, I've very much got Malcolm Marx, Lua Diaga as your sort of 2 very experienced players. Juarno Augustus is also pretty experienced, maybe not on an international point of view, but and in the backline, for example, you've got the calm heads of a JC Creel, a Damian Willemse in and around, and Coatley Arendse in and around your more inexperienced Morne Feinberg, Sacha, Edville, Ethan Hooker, for example. So that's what I'd like to see. What would you like to see? Let me know down in the comments below. Smash the like on the video. Subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Steve. I'll chat to you all very, very soon.